Commander Jack Callahan had piloted starships through asteroid belts, hovered dangerously close to black holes, and negotiated ceasefires between warring planetary factions. Yet he had never felt the kind of dread that now gripped his heart. As his damaged scout vessel hurled through the swirling storms of Veydra's atmosphere, it groaned with every impact of ionized hail battering its hull. Alarms shrieked in the cockpit. Sparks erupted from an overloaded console, illuminating the cramped compartment with a violent flicker. Desperately, Jack wrestled with the flight controls, trying to keep the ship from a catastrophic spin. The planet below was a vast stretch of white, an unending tundra of ice that reflected the hostile sky. Frigid winds whipped across the surface in swirling patterns. Even through the reinforced viewport, Jack could see the terrible beauty of this frozen world. The swirl of thunderheads overhead pulsed with jagged streaks of blue lightning. This was not the mission he had been sent to accomplish, but the fates seldom asked his approval. As the starship's engines sputtered, a final jolt sent the craft tumbling. Jack's head snapped forward, his vision swimming. A final, concussive crash made everything go dark. When Jack opened his eyes again, cold and agony were his first sensations. A stinging wind howled through a gash in the hull, sending sparkling frost into the cockpit. He moaned, pulling himself up to examine his injuries. His body responded sluggishly, weighed down by a failing pressure suit. The temperature gauge on his wrist device blinked red, warning that conditions outside were fatally sub-zero. The battered hull offered little refuge. Jack had to move. He dragged himself through the wreckage, a dull ache throbbing in his left leg. Broken supply crates were scattered along the twisted metal corridors leading to the cargo hold. Outside the partial hull breach, a white expanse stretched to the horizon, wind-sculpted drifts shimmering under the watery glare of Veydra's sun. Jack weighed his options quickly: remain with the ship, or venture into the unknown in search of help or resources. The ship's distress beacon had been destroyed by the crash. He had checked that first. Though the rest of the cabin was compromised, he rummaged through storage compartments and found the remains of an environmental suit that could sustain him for a short period in the cold. Donning it carefully, mindful of bruises and the persistent ache in his leg, he launched out into the biting wind. His footprints soon disappeared behind him, swallowed by the endless snow. He walked for an hour, perhaps two, stumbling when a hidden crevasse yawned beneath him or the wind gusted too fiercely. His breath was ragged in the rebreather. The planet was as silent as a cathedral, except for the unearthly howl of the wind. There were no animals visible, no sign of civilization. Only the swirl of vast storms on the horizon. It felt like the edge of existence. Then, through the howling gale, Jack glimpsed a shape. A towering silhouette cut across the blinding whiteness. His heart hammered. He could not tell if it was friend or foe. The shape advanced on foot. The swirling wind obscured details, but eventually, the figure loomed close enough for him to discern something that made his breath catch in his throat. A tall, elegant being at least 8 feet in height, draped in dark, fur-trimmed robes. Flanking her were heavily armored guardians with spears that crackled with energy, forging an imposing retinue around her. Before Jack could react, the guards were upon him, their weapons raised. He raised his gloved hands in a gesture of peace, battered by blasts of frozen air. His voice, when he tried to speak, emerged in a hoarse croak through the rebreather. But the woman who led this entourage commanded them with a single gesture. The guardians parted, letting her approach. She was regal, imposing, and strange beyond comprehension. Her silver hair cascaded down her shoulders in shimmering braids. Her complexion was a pale lavender, and her piercing black eyes gleamed with a mix of curiosity and disdain. When she finally spoke, her voice cut through the wind like a blade. "Take him," she ordered. And then, oblivion swallowed him again. Jack awoke in a place of chiseled grandeur, a sprawling interior shaped from walls of glossy black stone. Massive torches illuminated ancient carvings that told epic histories in swirling patterns across the walls. Beneath him was an ornate bed draped in luxurious cloth. He was warm, surprisingly so. Outside the edges of his bedchamber, he heard echoes of strange footfalls and distant conversation in a melodic alien tongue. He attempted to stand. A wave of dizziness hit him, forcing him to sit again. He then noticed an intricate band of unknown metal clasped around his wrist, a device that appeared to be monitoring his vitals. Probing gently at his injury, he realized his leg had been carefully wrapped in some advanced healing salve or bandage that radiated soothing warmth. Curiosity and survival instincts sparked inside him. He rose, ignoring the twinges of pain, and wobbled to the heavy door. It slid aside with a whisper of mechanics. Outside, 2 sentries stood as tall as he was, each wearing the distinctive armor he recognized from the frigid plains. They regarded him impassively through sleek helmets, their eyes barely visible behind tinted visors. At his approach, they parted, allowing him passage down the corridor. There was no menacing movement to restrain him. Perhaps they expected compliance, or perhaps curiosity had overruled their caution. The corridor opened into a majestic throne room. Jack's breath caught. Stone columns soared overhead, lit by glowing crystals suspended from the ceiling. Under the central dais, a glowing brazier of swirling blue flame cast flickering shapes across the mosaic floor. Seated upon the throne was the very woman who had found him on the ice. She wore robes trimmed in a regal purple that offset her alien complexion, and her eyes were as cold and commanding as before. Though dwarfed by her 8-foot stature, Jack lifted his chin, trying to keep an air of respect without showing fear. She regarded him with a cool disdain, as though he were an oddity rather than a threat. Beside her stood another figure, slightly shorter, perhaps 7 feet. This one had elaborate rings on her fingers, and she was whispering into the queen's ear. A hush fell across the chamber, for there were onlookers, nobles of the court, scholars, and guarded warriors. All eyes turned toward Jack. The regal figure rose, descending the dais in a fluid movement. Jack resisted the temptation to step back, because her presence was overwhelming. An aura of authority emanated from her like a tangible force. When she spoke, her voice filled the chamber. "I am Xyra, Empress of the Zepharion Empire, heir to the white dominion of Veydra," she proclaimed. "You have intruded upon our domain, human, and you have survived. That alone warrants curiosity." Jack swallowed. "I'm Commander Jack Callahan, of the Terran Exploration Corps," he said slowly, ensuring the translator embedded in his collar was active. "My ship crashed. I did not intend to intrude." A ripple of conversation passed among the assembled courtiers. Clearly, they understood him well enough, or at least recognized that he meant no immediate harm. Xyra's intense gaze never left him. "I have read transmissions from your people. I know your star languages," she said in a level tone. "But you will remain here in my custody. You will answer my questions truthfully, or be cast into the ice." Jack had faced intimidation tactics many times. He also knew it was wise to show deference here. "I will cooperate," he answered, inclining his head in a brief bow. "Thank you for sparing my life." An almost imperceptible smirk tugged at the corners of Xyra's mouth. "For now," she said, her voice laced with irony. "We shall see how long you can amuse me." Weeks passed, though Jack's sense of time faltered beneath the perpetual gloom of Veydra's storms. Within the fortress that served as Xyra's palace, he discovered a society both technologically advanced and steeped in ancient tradition. The Zepharians used black stone grown from bioengineered crystals that could be molded into structures of surreal elegance. Their artisans sculpted living metals that retained memory of shape. Their war spears crackled with harnessed energy fields. Yet they also held fast to feudal traditions, loyalties to bloodlines, and an unbending worship of the Empress's lineage as near divine. During this time, Xyra summoned him frequently. Sometimes she would interrogate him about Earth, the Terran starways, and the number of warships among humankind. Other times, she demanded to know the secrets of their technology, what drives powered their starships, how their weaponry functioned. Jack was cautious, measuring his answers. He recognized the danger of revealing too much, but he also gleaned that the Empress and her council were not ignorant. They possessed advanced instruments, strange data crystals, and a knowledge of cosmic geography that might rival Earth's. Whenever he spoke, Xyra would watch him as though he were an animal performing in an arena. She would occasionally laugh softly, a low, silvery sound, when he tried to ask her direct questions in return. She rarely answered him directly. Yet there were times her curiosity went beyond mere interrogation. She asked about Earth customs, especially regarding families and mating. She seemed fascinated, almost dismissive, by how short humans were, how quickly they reproduced, and how ephemeral their lifespans. Her towering form, elegantly proportioned for her species, was the living embodiment of her empire's superiority. To her, humans must appear weak and puny. One day, she wandered closer during an interrogation, trailing her fingers over the stubble on Jack's chin. He had not been allowed access to a razor. She tilted his head up with surprising gentleness, examining the lines on his face. "Such small creatures you humans are," she mused. "And yet, there is something about you I cannot dismiss. Perhaps it is the spark of your cunning, or your fierce will to survive." Jack's pulse quickened, but he tried to maintain calm. "Humans can be resourceful, Your Majesty," he replied. "We adapt. It's what we do." "Yes," she murmured. "You adapt. Still, I find the idea of a Zepharion mating with a human laughable. Our people would consider such an act sacrilege, or at best, a bizarre curiosity." She smirked. "You must know our power is not to be taken lightly." He nodded. "I have no intention of offending you or your people." He paused. "Although, I would be lying if I claimed I didn't find you fascinating." Her dark eyes flickered with something. Amusement, perhaps, or the faintest trace of interest. Then she turned away, cloak swirling. "Return him to his quarters," she ordered the guards. "Ensure he remains unharmed." For now. A few days later, Jack ventured beyond the palace with an escort. The Empress had allowed him a supervised tour of the city's spires within the fortress walls. He discovered towering architecture built upon geothermal vents, channels that harnessed heat from beneath the planet's ice. The city's inhabitants thrived under an artificial climate bubble. Alien fauna grew in carefully cultivated domed gardens. Ghostly white creatures, akin to deer, roamed within enclosures. And always overhead, the swirling storms of Veydra raged, barely kept at bay by shimmering energy fields that crackled along the perimeter. Jack's guard was led by a stern, sharp-faced Zepharion named Vela. Where Xyra was aloof and commanding, Vela was curt, suspicious, and borderline hostile. He carried one of those electrified spears and wore ceremonial armor. Though orders mandated Jack's safety, the man made no secret of his contempt for the human. Still, Jack gleaned interesting tidbits of palace intrigue from overhearing conversations or from cautious questions. He learned Xyra had ascended to the throne after her father's death. She was the first unwed empress in the empire's long line, which caused some agitation among the noble houses. Rumors swirled that she was betrothed to a powerful warlord, but no official announcement had been made. Jack also learned that a rival faction, led by a highborn named Lord Tyzhr, was rumored to be challenging Xyra's authority. Tyzhr believed the old ways demanded a swift union of royal bloodlines to produce an heir. Xyra's reluctance to wed had sown unrest, though none dared openly defy her. The empire was perched on the brink of internal strife. For Jack, the next weeks became a careful dance. Each day he found a new opportunity to prove his usefulness, advising on star charts, explaining certain mechanical concepts. In return, he pressed for resources to repair his crash-landed ship. He promised if he could restore his communication device, he might call for rescue from Earth. Xyra's interest was piqued. She wanted to see more of Terran technology, wanted to gauge if humans posed a threat or might be potential allies. And so it was that Jack was permitted to gather salvage from his wreck. Flanked by guards, he trudged across the windswept ice back to his shattered vessel. He retrieved battered scanners and a still-functioning power cell. He worked tirelessly in a small workshop provided by Xyra, hooking these devices to the local power grid. The Empress visited from time to time, never alone, always with her retinue, to watch with guarded fascination as he worked. Despite her outward aloofness, Jack sensed something subtle shifting in her demeanor. Sometimes she lingered a moment longer than necessary, or asked him about Earth with a gentler curiosity. Once, he noticed how her gaze lingered on his hands, noticing the small scars and calluses from a lifetime of engineering tasks. She seemed to be wrestling with a conflict inside herself, some internal debate about the significance of this puny human in her midst. But that conflict was not hers alone. Jack felt an undeniable pull toward her. She represented danger, power, and an otherworldly beauty that haunted his dreams. He chided himself for developing these feelings. He reminded himself that she was effectively his captor, a formidable leader who might turn on him at any moment. And yet, the spark was there, igniting whenever their eyes met. One evening, Xyra summoned him to the great hall for a gathering of nobles. Over 100 members of the imperial court assembled in a grand banquet. A swirl of alien finery, tall forms draped in glittering fabrics, their eyes flickering with ambition or envy. Tall tables lined the edges of the hall. Servants poured luminous beverages into crystal chalices. Ambient music, played on elongated stringed instruments, resonated through the air. Xyra sat upon her elevated throne. To one side stood a man nearly her height, with long silver hair braided tightly. His expression was sharp, his eyes cold. Jack guessed this was Lord Tyzhr. Indeed, Jack caught glimpses of him whispering to lesser nobles, a faint sneer crossing his lips when he looked upon the human. In the midst of feasting and official announcements, Xyra ordered Jack to stand before the assembly. She introduced him as a Terran envoy, a visitor from beyond Veydra who had come under unfortunate circumstances. An uneasy stir moved through the crowd. The old guard muttered disapproval, no doubt questioning why a puny outsider was allowed so close to the Empress. Others seemed entranced by the novelty. Lord Tyzhr took the opportunity to address Xyra publicly. "My Empress, you honor this creature more than he deserves. Is it wise to allow an unknown being so near our most sacred seat of power?" His voice carried across the hall. A hush fell. Xyra rose slowly, her gaze unwavering. "I will decide what is wise for my empire, Lord Tyzhr," she said, her tone cold. "And you will remember your place." Jack stood still, tension coiling in his stomach. Tyzhr's lip curled. "Of course, my Empress," he said with a mocking bow. Then, with a theatrical gesture, he turned to the crowd. "Yet the faithful might ask, where does this path lead? Do we ally with outsiders to preserve our rule? Or must we remember the traditions that have guarded Veydra's throne since time immemorial?" The Empress's father never courted the curiosity of alien travelers. He knew the price of purity. An anxious murmur swept through the nobles. Xyra narrowed her eyes. "I recall my father forging many alliances with other starfaring races, from the Trelos to the Kalvari. We did not shrink from forging connections when it served the Empire. I do not fear these paths, Tyzhr." At that, Tyzhr's voice softened with false sincerity. "Then perhaps your hesitation to wed is equally unconnected to fear? Or do you think to preserve your line through less conventional means?" His gaze flicked meaningfully to Jack, stirring a wave of scandalized whispers. For an instant, a look of unguarded fury crossed Xyra's face. Jack braced himself, certain a confrontation would erupt. But the Empress controlled her anger. She turned to Jack with icy composure. "Be gone from here," she said quietly, though the entire hall heard. "Return to your quarters." Jack dipped his head in acknowledgement. Relieved yet uneasy, he retreated amid the stares and murmurs. Tyzhr's smug grin followed him like a specter. Hours later, as Jack paced in his chambers, the door slid open. In walked Xyra, alone, her robes dragging lightly across the polished stone. Jack's heart jolted. He bowed automatically, mindful of the tension from the banquet. She raised a hand, bidding him to stand. "Commander," she said softly, all the formality drained from her voice. He hesitated. "My Empress." She moved closer, her looming height making him tilt his head back to meet her eyes. The stony facade she wore before her court had melted away, replaced by something raw. She stepped around him, her movements quiet, like a predator circling. "Lord Tyzhr is testing me," she said at last. "He seeks to undermine my authority. The ancient families grow restless. They demand an heir to cement my line. My father's blood must continue." Jack swallowed. "Is there a reason you haven't chosen a consort? I don't mean to pry, but from what I've heard, it's unusual for an unwed empress to rule for so long." Her dark eyes flickered with subtle emotion. "I was betrothed once," she answered, her voice nearly a whisper. "But the betrothal was arranged, a political tool, and the man behind it died in an accident. I have no desire to bind myself to a man I do not trust." She paused, crossing her arms. "And there is another reason. My father had visions of forging alliances not through conquest alone, but through the merging of knowledge, perhaps even of blood. He believed in the potential of hybrid vigor, though in hushed whispers. Yet the old guard found such talk borderline blasphemy. The purity of the Zepharion line, they claim, is paramount. A hush fell between them. Jack's heart pounded. And you might consider forging such a path? He asked carefully. She studied him, a guarded intensity in her gaze. I told you once the idea of mating with a human was laughable. A jest. But I find myself drawn to you, Jack Callahan. You have spirit, a will, and a curious mind that will not submit. In my people, submission is ingrained from birth. In you, I sense a challenge unlike any I have faced. He took a tentative step forward, feeling an invisible tether pulling them closer. I'm not sure what to say. Your people are shorter-lived than mine. Fragile, by comparison. She paused, setting her jaw. And yet, there's a spark in you that I cannot help but admire. Jack's mind whirled. This was madness. She was an alien queen, 8 feet of regal power, and he was a human crash survivor. And yet every fiber of his being was drawn to that spark between them. He recalled how TYZHR had publicly mocked the idea of them mingling. The notion filled him now with defiance. He inhaled a steadying breath. I feel the same pull, he admitted quietly. But we walk a dangerous line here. Her lips curled into a small, sardonic smile. Danger is a queen's daily bread. She reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder, then traced her fingertip lightly down his arm. Tell me, Commander, if we were truly free, free of tradition, free of watchful eyes, would you defy your own to stand with me? He surprised himself by replying, without hesitation, yes. A tremor passed between them, electric. Slowly, as if drawn by an inexorable gravitational pull, he lifted his hand to hers. She bent, lowering her regal height enough that her face was mere inches from his. The moment was charged with more tension than any war or negotiation he'd ever faced. Their lips met in a tentative yet searing kiss. For a heartbeat, the gulf between species, between throne and captive, melted away. When they parted, Xyra's eyes shone with an inner light. Then let us face the consequences, she whispered. For a time, they kept their relationship hidden. Late at night, Xyra would slip into Jack's chambers or summon him to hers. In hushed whispers, she confided stories of her lineage, her father's bold vision of an empire that embraced knowledge from other civilizations. Jack, in turn, spoke of Earth, of the tapestry of cultures and the unstoppable curiosity that drove humans to the stars. They became each other's confidants in a place riddled with political intrigue. Still, they knew they tread on dangerous ground. Lord TYHR's suspicion burned brighter each day. Vela, the stern guard who escorted Jack, seemed to watch him more closely. Rumors circulated in the palace, furtive glances, whispers in the corridors. More than once, Xyra's advisors hinted that the Empress should dismiss the human or lock him in the dungeons to avoid impropriety. Yet Xyra refused. Her will was as immovable as the black stone of the fortress. Indeed, a quiet shift occurred in the hierarchy. Guards who voiced hostility toward the human found themselves reassigned. Advisors who petitioned for his expulsion went unheard. Meanwhile, Jack used his access to the workshops to construct a rudimentary communications array. He hoped to send a signal to the Terran core to inform them of his survival and the presence of an advanced civilization. But each time he tested the transmitter, the storms of Veydra interfered. The planet's ionized atmosphere scrambled signals and prevented a clean broadcast. Late one evening, a fierce blizzard raged around the fortress dome. In Xyra's private chambers, Jack and the Empress hunched over a star chart. Splayed across a holographic field were constellations and coordinate lines. Xyra traced a path with her slender finger. If we could find a stable orbit for your communications satellite, beyond the swirl of Veydra's atmospheric storms, you might be able to reach your people, she said. Precisely. But we'd need a shuttle, or some way to get an antenna high enough without it being shredded by the storms. She nodded. We have vessels capable of suborbital flight, though they're seldom used. My father constructed them for bridging alliances with off-world delegates. If we can keep this quiet, we might manage a brief launch from the polar station. But I must ensure no one intercepts it. Jack placed a hand gently on hers. Thank you, he said, voice sincere. I know this is a huge risk for you. She looked down at his hand, the difference in scale striking. Then she gently clasped his. Yes, but I believe in forging this bond. A flicker of worry crossed her face. Jack noticed. What's wrong? She hesitated. For days, I have felt unwell. My physicians dismiss it as exhaustion, but I sensed changes in my body. Her words hit him like a wave of realization. She was not speaking of a simple illness. Their clandestine relationship had grown more intimate over the past weeks, their stolen nights more impassioned. A swirl of awe and fear churned in Jack's stomach. You suspect? He began. Xyra pressed a hand to her lower abdomen. I suspect I carry a child. Her gaze locked with his. Your child. For a long moment, neither spoke, the only sound the roaring wind outside. Emotions cascaded through Jack, wonder, joy, and dread. The significance was colossal. An alien-human hybrid. In a society that prized racial purity, in a court filled with political sharks. It was the ultimate taboo, but also the ultimate possibility for bridging species. At last, Jack found his voice. We can confirm it medically. You have the technology. She nodded, swallowing hard. Yes, but if word spreads, the consequences will be immeasurable. TYZHR will label it an abomination. Many in the Empire will feel betrayed. Jack exhaled, heart pounding. What do you want to do? Xyra's eyes flashed with steely resolve. I will protect my child. Your child. I will protect us both. Let the Empire quake if it must. I am the Empress. Within days, the clandestine pregnancy was confirmed. Xyra's personal physician, sworn to secrecy, verified that her physiology showed early signs of carrying a hybrid fetus. Rumors churned beneath the palace floors like molten lava. There was a tension in the air, though none could pinpoint why. Xyra tried to attend to her duties as normal, but she tired more easily, occasionally pausing during court sessions as though a wave of vertigo had gripped her. Though she commanded absolute secrecy, the truth could not remain hidden indefinitely. Sharp-eyed nobles noticed changes in her figure, the subtle rounding that no robe could fully disguise. Gossip metastasized. Some claimed the Empress was ill. Others suspected a far more incendiary explanation. Lord TYZHR, always watchful, confronted Xyra in the grand corridor one morning. You seem weary, my Empress, he said, feigning concern. Is there anything we loyal subjects can do to aid your recovery? Xyra waved him off with regal disinterest. Your loyalty is questionable, TYZHR. I need no assistance from you. His eyes narrowed, taking in her posture, the protective way she held her hand near her abdomen. He said nothing, but a knowing malice gleamed in his gaze. That very evening, as Jack returned from the workshop, Vela intercepted him. The guard, who had once shown open hostility, now merely appeared grave. Commander Callahan, I must take you to a secure location. Immediately, Jack's stomach clenched. What happened? Vela didn't answer. He escorted Jack through dim corridors, down a spiral staircase, into a small antechamber hidden from the main palace routes. There stood Xyra and a handful of her most trusted guard captains. Her face was drawn, a mixture of fury and fear. She wasted no time in pleasantries. TYZHR knows, she said. Or at least, he strongly suspects. He has demanded a full assembly of the noble houses in 2 days. He seeks to challenge my right to rule, claiming I have violated the sanctity of the Empire in the most grievous way. Jack tried to mask his alarm, but his voice wavered. And how do you plan to respond? She drew herself up to her full imposing height. I will do what I must. I will not be blackmailed. The Empire will accept my child or face war within itself. TYZHR gambles that I fear civil conflict enough to yield, but he does not know how far I will go to protect what is mine. Her eyes flicked over Jack, as if steeling herself with the sight of him. You must remain hidden until this assembly, she commanded. He cannot claim your presence as proof of my crimes if he cannot find you. Jack's protective instincts flared. I want to be by your side, to protect you, and... She silenced him with a raised hand. I understand, but your presence would only inflame the aristocracy. If TYZHR tries something, if he attempts to dethrone me, we will have a contingency plan. Vela will help you escape with a squad of loyal guards if the worst transpires. He met her gaze. And what about you? A small smile touched her lips, though sorrow shadowed her eyes. I will stand and fight for our child, for the Empire. For both of us. The day of the assembly arrived. Snow battered the fortress dome with renewed fury, as though nature itself reflected the turbulent crisis. The Great Hall was packed with the leading houses of Zepharion nobility, along with generals, advisors, and a scattering of lesser courtiers who had come to witness history in the making. Jack lay hidden in a cramped side chamber, peering through a narrow gap in the ornate stone screen. He could see Xyra, enthroned at the dais. She wore majestic robes of midnight blue, shot through with silver thread. Her hair was coiled in an elaborate crown, giving her an even more commanding presence. Across from her stood Lord Xyra, flanked by his allies. He wore ceremonial armor, a cape of black fur draped across his shoulders. He radiated smug confidence as he addressed the assembly. "Great houses of Veydra, hear me," Xyra declared. "We stand on the precipice of catastrophe. Our Empress, entrusted with the sacred blood of our line, has turned her back on our most cherished traditions. She consorts with an off-worlder. Nay, she has broken the taboo that has preserved our purity for eons." A shocked murmur erupted through the hall. Xyra's eyes flashed with anger. She didn't deny it. She remained silent, letting the hush deepen. Xyra pressed his advantage. "I have witnesses who have seen her with the human. I have heard the claims that she carries his spawn. Is this the future of the Zepharion throne? A half-breed abomination?" Those words incited outraged exclamations from some corners, while others shifted uneasily. Even among the assembled lords, not all shared Xyra's fanaticism, but fear and uncertainty reigned. No one dared speak up. At last, Xyra rose from the throne, her bearing imperious, voice ringing with righteous fury. "My father was a visionary. He believed in forging alliances across the stars. He believed that new blood could bring strength, not weakness. I have found a partner who embodies the spirit of survival and determination. In him, I see a chance to unite two worlds and usher in a new era of possibility." She let her gaze sweep over them. "Yes, the rumors are true. I carry his child." An uproar ensued, shouts of dismay, shock, condemnation, but also some uncertain, supportive applause from pockets of the nobility who believed in the Empress. Jack's throat constricted at the sight of her standing so boldly, alone against the wave of outrage. Xyra seized the moment. "Then you admit your crime? You would taint our bloodline, flout the laws of Veydra, and birth a monster upon the throne." Fury lit Xyra's face. "You call my child a monster? My child who carries the legacy of two proud peoples." Her voice dropped dangerously low. "We shall see who the monster is, Xyra." In a single, fluid motion, Xyra drew his crackling energy spear. Around him, his allies did the same. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A handful of loyal guards rushed to protect Xyra. The assembly teetered on the brink of violence. "By ancient right, I challenge you, Xyra," Xyra spat. "You are unfit to rule. Yield the throne or face me in trial by combat." Silence cloaked the great hall. Jack's heart pounded as he crouched in the side chamber. He willed himself to remain hidden. Xyra had insisted. Yet seeing Xyra brandish his spear, ready to strike, was almost too much to bear. From across the room, Xyra regarded Xyra with a steely calm. "The laws are clear," she said. "A challenge to the throne must be met in a sanctioned duel. But you forget something important, Xyra." "And what is that?" he growled. Xyra's lip curled. "No one can stand against the Empress and live." She descended the dais. The crowd pulled back, forming a ring. Xyra advanced warily, spear humming with lethal energy. Xyra raised her bare hands, the metal gauntlets of her station stripped away. A hush fell over the hall, thick with tension. They circled each other, two towering figures, the fate of an empire in their hands. Xyra lunged, spear crackling in an arc. Xyra twisted aside with inhuman grace, her cloak swirling. She struck with a palm that glowed faintly, a personal shield device integrated into her regalia. The blow glanced off Xyra's armor, but he staggered, sparks dancing. A flurry of thrusts and parries followed. Xyra pressed hard, trying to corner her, but she danced away each time. The watchers remained silent, transfixed by the deadly dance. At one point, Xyra landed a grazing blow on Xyra's shoulder, searing the fabric of her robe. She hissed in pain but retaliated with a pulse of energy from a hidden gauntlet, momentarily knocking him off balance. From the side, Jack clenched his fists. He noticed a flicker of distress on Xyra's face when HFY's spear thrust came dangerously close to her abdomen. She was fighting for 2 lives now, her own and the child's. She could not afford a single mistake. HFY, sensing weakness, lunged again, faster, more ruthless. Xyra narrowly evaded him, but the strain showed in her features. At last, they locked weapons, his spear crackling against the glowing shield of her gauntlet. With a roar, HFY levered his superior strength and forced her backward. She slipped on the polished floor, stumbling. In that split second, HFY saw his opening. He reared back, spear poised for the killing thrust. Xyra raised her gauntlet arm in desperate defense, but the angle was wrong. Time slowed. Jack could endure no more. Leaping from his hiding spot, Jack sprinted onto the floor. He seized a fallen guard's spear, a lesser energy pike, and hurled it with every ounce of strength. The weapon streaked across the ring. HFY, consumed by his final strike, reacted too late. The spear slammed into his side, slicing through armor. He staggered, howling in rage and pain. Xyra capitalized on the moment. Summoning her last reserves, she channeled an energy pulse through her gauntlet directly into HFY's chest. The shock blasted him off his feet. He crashed against the stone floor, armor sizzling, breath ragged. Panting, Xyra knelt over him. Her face was fierce, eyes blazing with triumph and wrath. "You challenged me," she gasped. "You threatened my child. Now face your defeat with whatever dignity remains to you." HFY coughed, blood staining his lips. Still, he spat venomous words. "You have doomed us all with your unnatural union." He glared at Jack, who had rushed to Xyra's side. "This is not the end." With a final shudder, HFY sank into unconsciousness. Guards converged, binding him in restraints, uncertain if he lived or died. Murmurs swept through the hall, swirling with shock and awe. The Empress had claimed victory, but the cost of unity was now unmistakable. HFY's defeat should have silenced the dissent, but instead it ignited a civil war. Loyalists to Xyra, inspired by her display of strength, banded together in support of her rule. However, a sizable faction of aristocrats, outraged at what they perceived as betrayal, declared HFY a martyr to the purity cause. They seized armories in outlying provinces, harnessing their own advanced weaponry to strike at Xyra's loyal forces. Within days, the Empire trembled on the brink. The fortress city's shield was tested by sabotage attempts. Rebels attacked key supply lines, hoping to starve the Empress into submission. Xyra, rallying her generals, refused to abandon her stance. She decreed her child would be heir, and any who opposed it committed treason. Jack found himself thrust into strategy sessions, explaining Terran approaches to asymmetrical warfare, offering advice on how to defend critical infrastructure from infiltration. Soldiers on both sides wielded advanced weaponry, grown from the same bioengineered technologies. The planet's harsh climate only worsened matters, freezing entire battlefields into icy wastelands. More than once, Jack accompanied squads out into the field to help secure geothermal vents that powered the capital. He had proven his worth in saving the Empress. Now, he had to prove it on a larger scale. Meanwhile, Xyra's pregnancy progressed. She wore specialized armor to protect her abdomen and used advanced medical scans regularly. Despite the stress of war, her child's heartbeat remained strong, a testament, perhaps, to the mingled resilience of Zepharion and human life. Rebel forces launched a major offensive at the outskirts of the capital. They deployed monstrous war machines, spider-like constructs that scuttled across the ice, bristling with energy cannons. Loyalist defenders manned fortress walls. The clash of energies lit the night in brilliant flashes of green and violet lightning. The violence came dangerously close to breaching the city's protective dome. On the eve of the final battle, Xyra and Jack stood atop a high balcony overlooking the city. The flickering glow of distant fires mottled the horizon. The Empress wore a regal breastplate, her robes swirling in the biting wind. Jack stood beside her, hands clasped behind his back. "If the rebels break through, we evacuate to the polar station," Xyra said quietly. "I will not allow our child to be born into their hands." Jack nodded. "Understood. But if we evacuate, it might be seen as cowardice, something TYHR's faction could use to rally more support. She grimaced. Yes, it is a dire choice, but the child's survival is paramount. He placed a hand on her arm, the difference in size striking as ever. We won't let that happen. As if in response, thunder rumbled in the distance. The final confrontation loomed. In the early hours of the next morning, rebel forces launched their assault. Engines roared, weapons hummed with lethal charge. The fortress's shields struggled under the bombardment of energy lances. Xyra rallied her generals and loyalists to defend the gates. Jack manned the city's artillery arrays, using quick calculations to direct their return fire. The entire city resonated with the thunder of conflict. Then, at the height of the assault, Xyra's personal guard received an urgent message from the palace physician. The Empress was going into labor. The stress of battle, combined with the advanced state of her pregnancy, had triggered it. A stunned hush seized those who heard the news. Jack's blood turned to ice. In the middle of a war zone, the woman he loved was about to give birth to their child. The child who had sparked all this conflict. While the city walls raged with battle, Xyra lay in a secure medical wing, ringed by an elite guard. Torches and glowing crystals lit the chamber. Her face glistened with sweat, features twisted in pain, yet her eyes blazed with determination. She fought the pangs of labor with the same indomitable spirit she wielded in battle. Jack rushed to her side, his heart in his throat. The physician and attendants ushered him close, ignoring protocol in light of the unprecedented situation. The palace shook periodically from bombardments, but the reinforced structure held. For what felt like hours, Xyra endured the waves of contractions, her body straining with the unfamiliar demands of a hybrid pregnancy. Medical monitors beeped anxiously, torn between the needs of mother and child. Through it all, Jack whispered encouragement, gripping her hand in both of his. At last, amidst the swirling shadows and flickering lights, a piercing cry filled the chamber. Their child, a baby boy, pale lavender in hue, with subtle features that blended both species, entered the world. For an instant, time froze. The war outside, the centuries of tradition, the swirling storms of Veydra, all receded. Only this new life mattered. Tears traced down Xyra's cheeks as she beheld him. She gathered him into her arms, gazing in awe at his tiny face, the faint swirl of black hair crowning his head. Jack trembled with emotion, gently touching the baby's small hand. The child's fingers curled around Jack's finger with surprising strength. Then, commotion erupted outside. Guards and physicians tensed. Reports streamed in. The rebels had breached an outer gate. The palace itself was under threat. Despite her exhaustion, Xyra struggled to rise. "Protect our child," she gasped. She handed the baby to an attendant, who swaddled him in protective clothing. "We must quell this rebellion now." Jack gently pressed her back down. "You're in no state to fight." A wave of resolve flashed in her eyes. "I am the Empress of Veydra." She forced herself upright, ignoring the pain. "I will stand." Within minutes, the rebels stormed the palace corridors. The thunder of boots, the crackle of energy spears, filled the grand halls. Xyra, supported by a retinue of loyal guards, led a desperate defense. The child remained in a secure chamber with a protective detail, while Jack and the Empress confronted the invaders head-on. Lord Tyzhr, though gravely wounded, had recovered enough to lead his zealots. His eyes burned with fanatical intensity as they clashed in the throne room. Broken columns and shattered mosaic tiles bore witness to the carnage. Rubble littered the floor, the acrid scent of burning cloth hanging in the air. "You would risk the Empire for that abomination?" Tyzhr roared at Xyra, brandishing his spear. Rebels surrounded him, stepping over fallen palace guards. Xyra stood tall, though fatigue lined her features. "My child is the future," she thundered back. "He will unite what you would tear apart." "All I see is a perversion of our ancient legacy," Tyzhr snarled. "Zepharion blood must remain pure." He lunged, and the final duel began, a swirl of blazing energy. But Xyra was not alone this time. Jack joined the fray, wielding a captured rebel spear. Side by side, they battled Tyzhr's forces in a whirlwind of sparks. Though outnumbered, they fought with a ferocity born of protecting their newborn child. Moments stretched into an eternity of sweat, pain, and flashes of lethal power. One by one, the rebels fell to the defenders. At last, Xyra cornered Tyzhr against a toppled statue. Her spear glowed with the energy of a queen's wrath. With a fierce cry, she drove the weapon forward, piercing his armor. Tyzhr froze, eyes wide with shock. The spear crackled, sending jolts through him. He coughed, blood dribbling from his mouth. Glaring at Xyra, he spat a final curse. "You have doomed us." His words faded, and he slumped to the floor, lifeless. Around them, the rebel fighters still capable of movement dropped their weapons, recognizing the battle was lost. Loyalist guards quickly subdued them, binding their hands and dragging them away. The echo of the final clash reverberated through the ruined throne room. Xyra stood, spear still in hand, trembling with exhaustion. Jack rushed to her, gently prying the weapon from her grip. She swayed on her feet. "Jack," she murmured. "My child, is he safe?" He held her, supporting her. "Yes," he whispered, relief coursing through him. "He's safe." A quiet descended over the palace, broken only by the distant moans of the wounded. The civil war was finished. Xyra's rule would stand. But the empire was forever changed. In the aftermath, loyalist generals and advisors worked tirelessly to restore order. Xyra's leadership, bolstered by her victory in battle, brought the noble houses back in line. Many rebels surrendered, disheartened or ashamed, seeing the child was not some twisted horror, but a tiny, living symbol of possibility. Others who refused to accept the Empress's new vision fled to the planet's far reaches or off-world enclaves. As the fortress city repaired the damage, whispers circulated about the Empress's newborn, rumored to be the harbinger of a new age. Xyra did not hide him away. Instead, she presented him to the public at a carefully organized ceremony, unveiling the child from within soft blankets of Zepharion silk. The populace beheld the lavender-tinted skin and the delicate interplay of human and alien features. Rather than recoil in horror, many bowed in reverence, acknowledging that the Empress's line and their empire had taken an unprecedented step forward. In the hush that followed, Xyra proclaimed, "Behold Alien Callahan Xyra, heir to the throne of Veydra. May he lead our people to a grand future among the stars." Applause and cheering erupted, though a few uneasy onlookers remained. Still, the tide was turning in Xyra's favor. Jack, at her side, found himself overwhelmed by awe and gratitude. Their union, once deemed impossible, had forged something stronger than either had imagined. Months passed. Under Xyra's guidance, the Empire underwent subtle transformations. The strict barriers that once separated outsiders and natives softened. A new council was formed, with representation from both traditional nobles and progressive voices who recognized the galaxy was vast and alliances were necessary. Veydra's advanced technology, once guarded behind rigid xenophobia, began to expand outward, while Earth and other starfaring species looked on with cautious interest. Jack finally managed to calibrate a communications array that pierced Veydra's tumultuous atmosphere. He sent a message to the Terran core, detailing the events. The reply came weeks later. A diplomatic convoy would arrive, seeking formal relations with the Zepharion Empire. The possibility of peaceful contact and shared research thrilled Xyra. She welcomed the opportunity to show the galaxy that her child signified a new era, not only for Zepharians, but for humankind as well. As Arinon grew, his early development astonished physicians from both species. He possessed surprising strength for his age and exhibited an adaptive immune system gleaned from his mixed heritage. Even his eyes held a peculiar brilliance, silver irises flecked with gold, capturing the subtle traits of both worlds. Whenever Xyra held him, an expression of tender awe replaced the stern mask of rulership she wore at court. Jack delighted in rocking him to sleep, humming old Earth lullabies. It was a life neither of them had ever envisioned, yet it became their treasured reality. Still, challenges remained. Scattered pockets of rebellion, though leaderless, sometimes harassed convoys. Outside powers watched, uncertain how to respond to a monarchy that had toppled centuries-old traditions in mere months. Jack took on a semi-official advisory role to Xyra, helping her navigate the complexities of interstellar diplomacy. Their closeness was no longer a secret, though formal recognition of their union was a complicated matter in Zepharion law. One winter dawn, near the anniversary of their child's birth, Xyra and Jack stood together on a terrace high above the city. Dawn light painted the ice plains in hues of pale gold and silver. Snow drifted lazily outside the climate shield. Arinon lay nestled in a sling against his mother's chest, wide-eyed at the changing colors of the sky. Jack slipped an arm around Xyra's waist, gazing at the sunrise. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real," he said softly. She glanced down at him with a gentle smile. "Nor can I. We have defied expectations, ours and everyone else's." He pressed a kiss to her shoulder. "I love you, Xyra." She bowed her head, her voice quiet. "I love you as well, Jack Callahan. You and our son are everything I cherish." They stood that way as the new day broke across Veydra, bright and full of promise. Time has a way of softening edges once deemed insurmountable. The union of Commander Jack Callahan and Empress Xyra, once the catalyst for scandal and war, slowly became an enduring symbol of unity. Over the following years, their child, Prince Arinon, grew into a figure of fascination, living proof that Zepharion strength and human adaptability could coexist in one being. The rebellious elements, lacking both resources and charismatic leadership, were gradually incorporated back into the Empire's fold through amnesty and negotiation. Interstellar emissaries arrived from Earth, forging new pathways of trade and knowledge exchange. Zepharion scientists made pilgrimages to Earth to study Terran biology and culture, while Terran researchers ventured to Veydra, braving the planet's fierce storms in hopes of unlocking the secrets of bioengineered crystals and living metals. At the heart of it all stood Xyra and Jack, bound by a love that transcended their differences. Though others still whispered about the unlikely romance, none could deny the prosperity and progress the Empire had begun to experience under Xyra's rule. In the capital city, once overshadowed by suspicion, a new sense of optimism blossomed. Citizens welcomed diplomatic delegations with curiosity instead of fear. Cultural festivals sprang up, celebrating the blending of two worlds. Within the halls of the palace, Xyra continued her duties with unwavering devotion, often with Arinon toddling at her side. Jack offered counsel when needed, but never undermined her authority. He learned the value of standing beside her rather than overshadowing her. On one occasion, a Terran ambassador marveled at how easily Xyra cradled her half-human child in one arm while signing a treaty with the other. "I see the future in your child," the ambassador remarked. "I see a tomorrow where our peoples walk side by side." Xyra's response was simple yet profound. "The future is already here." And so, amid the swirling storms of Veydra, an empire once bound by rigid tradition learned that survival and adaptation could birth miracles. An empress once scoffing at the notion of mating with a human found her life inextricably intertwined with his. In defiance of all that was expected, they forged a legacy of unity, a child whose very existence was hailed as a bridge between species. The planet's storms raged on, as they always would, but within the protective domes and spires of the Zepharion capital, hope burned bright. As Jack and Xyra stood together, gazing at the horizon where alien skies and starry vistas met, they knew that no single act, no single child, could solve every challenge. Yet the bond they had created, sealed by love and proven by war, was unstoppable. It carried them forward into a future none had dared imagine. In the end, it was not the storms or the ancient laws that defined them. It was the simple, undeniable truth of new life and shared dreams. Two hearts, two species, united beneath the frozen heavens of Veydra. And as they looked upon their son, his eyes shining with both the dark luster of his mother's and the warm spark of his father's, they felt the promise of a tomorrow where boundaries between worlds might fade, and where love, in its strangest, grandest forms, would triumph.